Bureaus worldwide, this is FSN.
Welcome to Monday's programme. It's a wet and miserable old day in Salford. Hope you've had a good weekend. It's the 29th of June. Doesn't feel like it. There you are. How are you?
It's the BBG, not the BBC. You're listening to the Richie Allen Radio Show, live from Salford in Greater Manchester.
It's the Richie Allen Show, broadcasting live on richieallen.co.uk and multiple platforms around the world. And now, here's your host, Richie Allen.
Yes, Black Lives Matter activists in the UK have gotten into a bit of a Twitter spat with Zionists, pro-Zionist Jews in the UK. We'll talk about that in hour two with Kevin Barrett. It's all very interesting. TruthJihad.com, even Kevin, of course, a well-known academic from Wisconsin in the United States. He's not been on for ages, so Kevin Barrett returns to the programme. Before that, though, in hour one, this hour, Simon Dolan, the entrepreneur who's taken the UK government to court. He's challenging the legality of the lockdown. Simon Dolan returns to the programme. The High Court case begins on Thursday of this week. So Simon Dolan on the radio with me this afternoon. Monday's programme. Lovely, yeah, it's good. Brand new week. Lovely, lovely. I'm in fine fettle. Thanks for asking, by the way. I'm in good form. And looking forward to the week. Interesting guest, Vernon Coleman. The doctor returns to this programme tomorrow for a more extended conversation with me in the second hour. And lots more guests as well lined up. Remind me a little bit later on to tell you about Mark Boyarsky, who's been fundraising for this particular programme and has done an amazing job again. MarkBoyarsky.com. 5 past the hour then. Straight into it, because the monologue, we tend to run over time. BBC Sport today reporting that Mercedes, now I'm not the biggest Formula 1 fan in the world. I'm not a petrol head, you know. But Mercedes has announced, Mercedes has been the most successful team in recent years. And Lewis Hamilton, who's a bit of a genius by all accounts behind the steering wheel, has been, well, he's their number one driver, top man. So next year, the Mercedes cars will be in black and not in silver, as a signal of Mercedes' commitment to greater diversity and inclusion in motorsport. They've been using silver in racing since the 30s, but it'll be black next year because they want to throw, well, into the mix how much we need new measures and actions in the fight against racism. And they believe, Mercedes believes, that by painting the car black, it will let minorities know that, well, Formula 1 is for you too. Apparently 3% of Mercedes Formula 1 workforce is belonging to minority ethnic groups, and only 12% of employees are women. We're ashamed of our lack of diversity, apparently, at Mercedes. They want to find new approaches to attract talent from the many areas of society we don't currently reach. It'll be lesbians next. And this is where it goes, remember. I'm not joking. Remember the BBC diversity team? Remember 2 years ago we made a huge big deal of it on this radio programme. The guy responsible for BBC diversity said, and I quote, "We don't have enough lesbians at the organisation. We need to get more." This is where it ends up. We need more lesers. Where will we get them? Well, from Lesbania, of course. Where do you think? And this made me laugh. JK Rowling, or Rowling, I don't know how you pronounce it. I just know that she's one of the best-selling authoresses in the world ever. The Harry Potter woman. She'd been having a Twitter spat with the Labour MP Lloyd Russell Mole because he had been critical of her. He accused her of using her experiences of domestic abuse and sexual abuse to promote her transphobic views. And then he apologised because she tweeted that it isn't hateful for women to speak about their experiences, nor do women deserve to be shamed for speaking about their experiences, said JK Rowling. And Stephen King retweeted that, the king of horror himself. So JK was absolutely thrilled. she sent him a gushing tweet along the lines of, "I revere you, Stephen." But a few minutes later, somebody asked Stephen King to clarify his feelings about trans women. And Stephen King tweeted, "Yes, trans women are women." At which point JK Rowling, well, she unfollowed him.
What kind of fuckery is this?
She unfollowed him. She unfollowed him. That's what we must do these days. When somebody tweets something you don't like, unfollow them. Oh, yeah. Ashford is all a bit mad. You mad bastard, Stephen. Leicester is the focus of the BBC and Sky this afternoon. The city of Leicester in the Midlands. Because pubs and restaurants in Leicester might have to stay closed for 2 more weeks because of an alleged surge in coronavirus cases. Now, hark up. Wished. This is important. Right. Because as you might know, on Saturday, the pubs open in the rest of the country and the restaurants. Okay? And hairdressers. And all the rest of it. From Saturday. But apparently there's been a surge in cases in the last couple of weeks in Leicester. And the Mayor of Leicester has been talking. And the Prime Minister has been talking. So because of the resurgence in cases in Leicester, Leicester might be the very first city to be affected by what they have called localised lockdown. Right. Here's the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson.
We are concerned about Leicester. We're concerned about any local outbreak. And I want to stress to people that, we are not out of the woods yet. We have to remain vigilant. We have to continue to do the basics, washing our hands and all that.
Washing your hands and all that.
Plus, we need to have local lockdowns and local whack-a-mole strategies where that's necessary.
Is that scientific? Is that a scientific term for dealing with outbreaks of coronavirus? The whack-a-mole strategy. The whack-a-mole strategy. Here's the Mayor, Soulsby. He's not impressed.
This is a report from Public Health England, and it would really be for the government to explain, if we were to continue the lockdown in Leicester, how they would enforce it, which parts of the city they would enforce it in, and who would be responsible for making sure that it works. I hope that they will, first of all, provide us with the evidence for why it might be necessary, but then explain to us how on earth it could be made to happen.
Yeah. How can you make it happen? What's to stop people from Leicester taking a bus or a train, with a mask on, of course, to Nottingham to go on the piss? It's all a bit silly, this, isn't it? A bit silly. Restaurateurs and bar people in Leicester are not impressed at all. Who could blame them? Let's hear from, and I hope I pronounced this right, is it Shafiq? It is, it's Shafiqul. That's right, Shafiqul. Shafiqul is a restaurateur. He's not happy.
I'm just gobsmacked. I mean, what else can we do? We could just prepare following government guidelines and so on. But then this is just another little explosion that's happened, a little bomb that's gone off for our business with the hospitality trade, which has been absolutely decimated so far. So I really don't know what to make of it. I had the brewery on the phone earlier on trying to get the order in, but I said I'm not sure because beers already have such a small shelf life, and if you lock down for another 2 weeks, we don't know what else is going to happen.
Madness, isn't it? In Leicester. We'll wait and see what happens. That's a developing story, so we're on air until 7 o'clock. If something happens and they make it official that Leicester will be subject to 2 further weeks of lockdown while everybody else allegedly leaves lockdown, we'll keep you posted there. This is the Richie Allen Radio Show live, as usual, from Salford. It's coming up for 12 minutes past 5. Thanks for joining the programme. Do tweet to me and let me know your thoughts. It's at Richie Allen Show there. Well, Jean Ann Crowley is an Irish woman whom I'm familiar with in the friendly sense, and she'll be impressed or happy or thrilled or jumping around that the hairdressers in Ireland opened today. The hairdressers are back in the Republic of Ireland. Hallelujah. Yes, hallelujah. The hairdressers are open. Hallelujah. Yes. It wouldn't make any difference to me, of course, with my cue ball countenance. Some hairdressers open at midnight this morning. Yes, midnight this morning, right? Yes. And there were people queuing for the midnight ones, a lot of young men. These ladyboys now that pass as young men, you know, guys who wear makeup and stuff, queuing to get their hair done. And the new normal was explained brilliantly by Sky News Irish correspondent Stephen Murphy. Stephen Murphy went to a salon in Dublin this morning to show you and to tell you what life is going to be like when you go to the hairdressers. And it's not good at all.
We're here at the Ciara Lambert hair salon, a well-known hair salon in South.
Is it? The Ciara Lambert salon. Is it? Is it well known? I wouldn't have a Scooby-Doo.
County Dublin. If I just walk in, this is what the new normal is going to look like.
Well, you hear this now. So he's at the front door. I've got to paint the picture for you as it's radio. He's at the front door. What has he got to do to get in?
Walk in, you'll be greeted here. You'll have to disinfect.
Disinfect?
There's perspex screens everywhere. There's a
perspex screens everywhere.
Temperature, a thermometer here, electronic one.
What?
Disinfect. There's perspex screens everywhere. There's a temperature, a thermometer here, electronic one.
There's a thermometer, and you've got to bend down and allow it to scan you to take your temperature before you can go and have your body wave or your perm. Right. And?
So there you go, 36 degrees. So I'm allowed to enter.
He's allowed in, 36 degrees.
You can see just how segregated the whole areas will be. If we come over, this is Paul, the stylist working this morning. Morning, Paul.
Morning, Paul. Now, Paul looks like the killer from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. He's got an apron on, he's got a big mad visor on and glasses and goggles and everything, and just looks absolutely mad. I wouldn't be sitting down in a barber stool with my back turned to Paul, but this is the new normal.
What's it feel like to finally get back to work, I suppose, after nearly 4
and yes, Paul is gay.
months?
Oh God, absolutely delighted. It's been a long 4 months, so yeah, long time coming.
Are there any straight male hairdressers in the world?
Do you feel comfortable working? I mean, obviously you're fully kitted out with the PPE here.
Oh God, yeah. Listen, it's not a bother. We're just happy to do whatever makes us safe and the client safe, so we're just happy to get back at it. So,
speaking of the client, this is Fiona. Morning, Fiona.
Now, Fiona is sitting in a chair. She's got layers of PPE equipment on as well. Layers of it. She's also got a mask. You can barely see her face, actually.
How long has it been since your last haircut, and how badly do you need this?
4 months.
It's like going to confession. How long has it been since your last confession? 6 months. And, well, I didn't love God. I didn't love Jesus when I cheated on my wife. Say 2 Hail Marys, then you'll be all right, pal. 2 Hail Marys for infidelity. Right, is Fiona safe?
4 months.
4 months. It doesn't look that
badly
bad.
needed. So yeah, I'm delighted to get back. Delighted to see the hairdressers open again.
And just do the precautions. I see the disposable gown you're wearing there. Does that make you feel more comfortable, I suppose?
Very safe. Yeah, I feel very safe.
Very good. Thanks for talking to us.
Very safe. She feels very safe.
What kind of fuckery are you?
Pure fuckery is what it is. Get to the front door where you'll be greeted by somebody who tells you to stay 2 meters away from them, wearing protective equipment. You'll have to scan your temperature, and then you'll be left in where Toby Hooper like characters are standing there. They look like they're prepared to carve your body up. It's like walking in to a Mexican drug cartel lair as a member of a rival gang. Honest to God, the gear they're wearing would make you think you're about to be butchered. That's your new normal. Yeah. 17 minutes past the hour. Not good, is it? We're going to be paying back the borrowing for years and years and years and years. The borrowing to alleviate the problems brought on by the lockdown, the borrowing that was engaged in, that was green lit, there's that term again, by the UK government to basically tell people to go home, don't work, and we'll give you 80% of your wages. But we'll have to borrow that, and we'll eventually have to pay it back. Billions. And austerity is a reality. But Ken Clarke, the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, was on LBC Radio today, and he said that the austerity won't be immediate, because that would be a mistake by Johnson, but it will come in the not too distant future. This is the reality. Ken Clark on LBC.
Well, eventually we're going to have to pay for all this money we're spending, but not straight away. I actually think that to go back to austerity straight away would be disastrous. You know, I'm as fiscally careful as George Osborne, and I just think the circumstances are totally different. The ones after the financial crash. This isn't like a financial crash. This is quite different. This is a sudden stop of the whole economy for 3 months, on which some of the economy will recover soon, but which will have lasting effects and will have caused great economic problems. I mean, Boris is right to change the subject matter to the economic crisis, which is at least as bad as the health crisis, and which is going to start hitting us now. And he's right to say that although you've got to be very careful what you spend, it's no good, mustn't get carried away thinking there's free money, because there's not. But you are going to have to spend...
But it is free money, because the bank creates it out of thin air. It doesn't take its capital reserves, it doesn't take money and give it to you, and thereby decreasing its own amount of money by the amount it gave you. This is the thing, you see. The first time a mainstream media presenter has the cojones, has the testicle to ask a gatekeeper like Kenneth Clark, who are you borrowing it from and why? Why are we borrowing from the bank of ourselves? It doesn't take money and give it to you and decrease its own capital reserves by doing so. It is invented out of thin air. This is the foundation on which the entire global conspiracy is built. And the austerity to come, it'll be unimaginable. Unimaginable what they're going to do in the next few years. And I've already talked about bail-ins, wealth taxes on people in the middle of the night when you don't know anything about it. Right? So Clark is saying it would be stupid for Johnson to introduce austerity very soon. But of course we'll have to have austerity. And it'll make the post-2008 spending cuts look generous in the near future. And all the while this is going on, the UK Labour Party is arguing for the furlough scheme to be extended beyond September indefinitely, irrespective of how much money needs to be borrowed to pay for it. Crazy. 21 minutes past the hour. This is the Richie Allen Radio Show. Simon Dolan, I'm absolutely sure, is standing by to talk to us. He's in the High Court with the UK government this coming Thursday. And I believe, and we'll ask Simon, but I believe we'll be able to watch it. We'll be able to watch it because it'll be... Simon won't be there in person because of lockdown measures. It's all going to be remote. So I do believe we'll be able to watch it happen as it happens on Thursday. So we'll get Simon Dolan on now. In the meantime, here's music from Albert Hammond. And I love this, and I've not heard it for ages, so I said I'd give it a spin for you, eh? Welcome to the show. Albert Hammond on the Richie Allen Show. That song was going around and around and around my head this morning for no good reason. And I don't think I've ever played it on this programme, so I dug it out and, well, there you are. 25 minutes past the hour, Monday's programme. Welcome to it. Let's get serious. This is very serious. My guest at this hour, back in May, began proceedings against the UK government and its decision to lock down the country. He believes the government acted illegally and disproportionately over the lockdown. He crowdfunded, hugely successful crowdfunding campaign to pay for the court case, which will hit the High Court this Thursday. He's a very successful businessman and motor racing driver as well. It's great to welcome back to the programme Simon Dolan. Simon, thanks so much for coming back on. How are you and how excited are you about this coming week?
Yeah, hey Richie, it's good to be back. Excited, a little bit nervous, I guess. It's the preliminary hearing on Thursday, so that's a biggie. But we're not going to get a decision. That will go to the full hearing in a few days after that. But I think we've achieved so much so far, just in what we've exposed and what we've managed to get published, which wouldn't ever have seen the light of day So, either which way we go, I think we've achieved a lot and a lot more to do. So, yeah, excited about it.
You're flying. Give us a flavour give us the highlights in the last few weeks of the things that you've managed to bring to light. What stands out for you?
The first thing was the Sage Minutes, because the government were absolutely saying all the way along they weren't going to release them until it was all finished, which would basically mean never. And we pushed and pushed on that, and then they published them. They didn't tell us that they were going to publish them; they just published them a couple of days after one of our chase-up letters, and that was good because that gave an awful lot of background information, and people have picked them to bits and have seen an awful lot of holes. So that was nice. That was the first win. And then the school story was remarkable, and you got to see just how, I hesitate to use the word corrupt, but I will anyway. You got to see how corrupt their defence and how the government actually really are. When obviously everybody knew that the government closed schools down, and we challenged them on that and said, basically under what legislation did you do that? How did you do it? And so on. And then the government's defence quite famously was no, I don't know what you're talking about. We never closed schools down. No, we just recommended that they be closed down. But no, your defence is absolutely, your claim is absurd. We never closed school down. So that was pretty impressive, trying to, having got to actually admit that there was no basis. And then you think, well, okay, so if there was no basis for that, is there any basis for any of this? We've seen actually in just today, in Leicester, where the government were saying that Leicester was going to go on a regional lockdown. And the mayor of Leicester, credit to him, has said, no thanks, I'm not doing that, which is just brilliant. So, okay, so what you mean the whole lockdown then hasn't had a legal basis? Because if it can't be done on a regional basis, then how the hell is it done on a national basis?
Yeah, and Soulsby, the mayor, as you quite rightly said, Simon, he wants to see the evidence, doesn't he, to justify any further lockdown. I felt really bad today. I mean, I'm somebody who's got a heart anyway, but I'm a bit unshockable, and you do get a little bit immune when you're covering stories 20 years now. But when I saw a couple of restaurateurs absolutely crestfallen, speaking to the media this morning, and a couple of bar owners, crestfallen, having ordered beer and gotten food ready and told their staff, I felt really bad for them. I really don't think that the people who get their news from the BBC, Sky or Channel 4, I don't think they've any idea what this is doing to people financially, but not just financially. Their health, Simon, I know you've been looking into this, their mental well-being. It's really taken a huge toll on people, hasn't it?
Yeah, and these stories are every bit as sad as somebody dying from this illness, the COVID illness. And people have died, not very many, in terms of, people below the age of about 80 something. But people have died, and it is tragic. But equally tragic are the deaths from suicide. 19-year-old that kills themselves because they're lonely or one of these other horrible things, cancers going undiagnosed, heart attack, people having a heart attack and not rocking up at hospital because the government have terrified them that they might go and catch something when they're there, or that they have to protect the NHS so they don't want to be a burden. This is absolutely dreadful. And this is people who have paid into the NHS all their lives and probably still worship it. And, they have quite literally been sentenced to death for what? For almost nothing as far as I can see. So tragic stories. And the health, obviously, they're the biggest stories. But people make the argument, well, if we save a life, it's worth trashing the economy for. Well, I would argue against that anyway. But even with that to be true, the fact is that if the economy is bad, then people will die because of that. So you're saving one life on one hand and probably losing 10,000 on the other hand. It's
You make a good point, and I know you've made it repeatedly on social media and in some of the other programs you've appeared on, that while they were saying from day one, we need to stay indoors because we have to, to help elderly and vulnerable people avoid it. They were taking vulnerable people out of hospitals and sending them to care homes where, I've had Vernon Coleman, former GP on this programme, very, very well-known GP, saying that basically by doing that, they were effectively exterminating old people. There's a huge hypocrisy there, isn't there? I mean, I don't know if that's going to come up over the course of your own case, but there's a glaring hypocrisy there. On the one hand, yeah, stay home and look after older people, but their policies have killed older people.
Yeah. And it was foreseeable. It was absolutely foreseeable. Now that it's either criminal negligence or they did it on purpose. I can't believe that they did it on purpose. So therefore, it's criminal negligence. Either way, they're criminally, in my mind, they're criminally liable. Whoever it was that made that decision, and there is a chain of command, and somebody has to take the fall for that. In the same way as a company, if there's a massive oil spill somewhere or other, then the head of the company has to take that. That's what he is the head of the company for, and it should be the same with ministers and health ministers and so on and so forth. If they're at the top of a chain of command and there's a catastrophically bad decision, they have to take the weight of it. So I fully expect after this, Hancock to be hung, drawn, and quartered. Actually. Not literally, but legally.
You think he'll take the fall?
You're absolutely right. They seeded the old people's homes with the disease. You couldn't make it up. I think there was a doctor that he said it was akin to in the old days, in the medieval times, when they'd find somebody who was infected with a Black Death and then sling them over the enemy rampart, so they infected everybody. Same thing.
Vernon Coleman believes it was deliberate. I don't know. I can't say that. I know I do have. I have guests on here and we exchange some views on some very interesting things, but I stay fairly neutral. I couldn't say that, and I'm like you. I'd prefer to believe that it was a catastrophic, ridiculous mistake, but a lot of people aren't seeing it like that. Can I ask you this, Simon? Simon Dolan is our guest, by the way. Simon is a successful entrepreneur. He's very well known. He's been a successful racing driver as well, and he's taking the UK government to court for what he believes was an illegitimate lockdown. Let me ask you this. One of the things I would be suspicious about is when this began, is that countries around Europe and even around the world were acting in unison. They were acting in a kind of a uniformed way. And they all came out very quickly with their do's and don'ts and, breaches of lockdown. You can't leave home. You can't do this. Fines. And some notable legal minds, including an Irish woman who works for the UN legally, a woman called Fionnuala Ní Éileán, she was very suspicious about that. Very suspicious about that, Simon, that they were all ready to go with these measures at the same time, and they all made the same alleged mistakes, in inverted commas, sending old people into care homes. Is that food for thought, do you think?
I think it's absolutely accurate, but I don't think that necessarily, proves some great conspiracy.
No.
I think after every epidemic or pandemic, and there's been a few of the flu ones, SARS was an obvious one, they always model the what they should do if another really bad one comes along. So I think all of the reactions actually come from the modelling that they did in, I think it was about 2016. And then they just thought to themselves, right, this is it, guys. This is the big one. We need to be prepared. What's our game plan? Oh, there was a game plan. We did this in 2016. Let's just roll it all out. So I think that's probably why it got rolled out the way it did and why everybody made the same mistakes, because they were playing from the same kind of, singing from the same hymn sheet. But I don't necessarily think that's, again, got nefarious overtones.
Fair enough, Simon. One of the things that people have been asking me to ask you is about some of the, and I suppose there are things you can't say, but there are some heavyweight medical and academic people, like I'm thinking of people like Sunetra Gupta, of course, at Oxford, who have been very critical of Sage and very critical of the lockdown. That obviously people are saying, well, great to have those people. Will you be introducing that sort of evidence, or is that something you can't say when you do get to make your case?
Well, no, the evidence is already, they're funny judicial reviews. They're not like your normal court case, so you don't have expert witnesses and cross-examinations and all that stuff. So it's not really like you'd be used to. So all of our evidence is presented. Essentially, all the cases there, all the government's defence that is there. So now it's up for the judge to look at it and first of all say, yes, okay, guys, you can have a full judicial review, and then go ahead and hear the full judicial review. And our evidence is 1,200 pages long. So there's an enormous weight of evidence, and it only grows day by day. Contrary to the government's position. And as time has gone by, the weight of the argument has fallen quite firmly in our favour, just by the weight of evidence.
And it all comes down to one legal mind, one judge, effectively.
Yep. And you wouldn't want to be in his shoes, would you? What he's being asked to do is to overthrow the biggest, probably one of the biggest legal decisions in English history. It sounds like I'm being dramatic, but it's the only time in English history where people have been locked up. It's never happened before.
House arrest.
In wartime, anything else, and you quite apart from everything else that's gone on, all of the seeding the old people's homes with the infection, all that stuff. Even if you put all that to one side, just simply the taking away of people's liberty is unprecedented. This judge then has to decide whether that was right or not. Think about that. If you're the judge, that's a big weight.
And what do you know about him, Simon?
Nothing. Nothing. I don't know anything about him. He's a judge, and they're similar ilks, I guess. Tend to be fairly establishment, but you get some that are more establishment than others. But I think that anybody looking on this at the weight of evidence could only conclude in our favour. Seriously, and I don't actually. Is there anybody that seriously argues now that the continued lockdown was a really good idea?
No, I mean, if you spend your time on social media, and I don't spend very much time on it, the weight of argument there seems to be with those who want to continue the lockdown. But I am very suspicious of that. I really am. I believe the social media companies have enabled our governments. I've no proof whatsoever to substantiate that, but it's what I believe, because we've seen evidence of it in other areas. One of the things I probably should have asked you the first time you were on, maybe I did, but I don't think I did. Why weren't the captains of industry, the men and women who've done well for themselves and who've built big companies with lots and lots of staff, influential people, the sorts of people whom I'm sure, like yourself, from time to time will make a donation to a political candidate or a political party. Where were they, Simon? Why didn't they say, I'm sorry, no, we're going to disobey it. We are going to open our business on Monday. We can't afford to do this. We don't agree with you. We're going to carry on. We've never, as you said, we've never quarantined the healthy. I've been very disappointed with business or big business in general. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I'm the same. I'm exactly the same. I'm really, really disappointed, actually. The problem is that most big businesses are not privately owned. Most big businesses are publicly owned. They're on the stock market, quoted on the stock market. And for those companies, they have to be seen to be doing what's right. And to go against the government for those people would be absolutely tantamount to corporate suicide, from the guy who runs the company, who, let's face it, he just runs the company. He's not really got any kind of vested interest in it other than his stock options, which would go down massively if he went against what the government was saying. And most of them had their hands out. I'm thinking of the aviation industry in particular, with the exception of Michael O'Leary, a brilliant businessman. He didn't have his hand out, and he would be the one, if anybody, we were just going to say, right, I'm going to put the planes in the air and stuff it. But of course, he's just as bound by regulations as the rest of us, and it's a little bit different with aviation because you get so many different points of interaction at airports and security and stuff like that. But there's been almost nobody's done anything, like no one from a larger business, and I think it's because they got their hands out. They're just, okay, we're not allowed to trade anymore, but just give us enough money. Yeah, pay the staff furlough. We can, make a few people redundant, streamline the business, do all that kind of stuff. Just keep handing us money out and we won't make a fuss.
One of the things that I mentioned, this Irish lawyer at the UN, Fionnuala Ní Éireann, one of the things that she said to Sky News some months ago was she said, I get very suspicious when something like the virus happens and all of a sudden you get all this legislation. She said it's like it was in a drawer somewhere waiting for the right crisis to come along. And that's the closest I've ever heard a notable academic or lawyer, barrister come to saying, I think there's a big conspiracy here. I'll tell you what I think, Simon. I think there are people who have for a very long time wanted to introduce a kind of a more dystopian reality for people, to take much more control over people's lives. I was watching Sky this morning and I saw people going into hairdressers, getting their temperatures checked and wearing PPE and all of this. And it's scary stuff. And what's even more scary about it is heavyweight political commentators and politicians are saying that, well, regardless of whether or not we eventually deal with COVID, regardless of whether we get a vaccine, pandemics are going to become the new norm, and we're going to be living like this. And that really, really bugs me. And I begin to listen to some of those conspiracy theories. The virus is real, the nasty strain of something. I think I had it myself over the winter. But maybe certain people have thought, marvellous, this is what we wanted. And away we go now with taking more control over people's lives. Do you have some sympathy? I'm not trying to get you into trouble here now with conspiracy theory talk, but you have to wonder, Simon, right?
I do think, I do agree with the lawyer, actually. I do think there are drawers full of bills and legislation that people would love to get through, and they're just waiting for the right moment. You know, it's a bit like when the government has to announce some really nasty, really bad news or negative news. They'll always do it on a Friday afternoon when something else is going on, so it gets buried under a mountain of everything else. And there's a classic. There's no one's picked up on it. Well, maybe a couple of places that I've spoken to, but there's an insolvency legislation going through in the UK, which is going to make it very, very difficult or actually impossible for companies to go insolvent. Now, there's a long, technical argument about why that's a really bad thing, but it is a terribly bad thing. It's probably for another show, but
no, it's hugely important. No, hang on, Simon, stay with that. This is hugely important. I was reading the Sunday Times on Sunday. I could have actually gotten into this on my newspaper review show yesterday, but I didn't have time. This is an act that basically came into effect, like you said, Friday, didn't it?
I'm not so sure that it's law yet, but it will be there because there's no one opposing it because there's all this other stuff going on.
It is. I hate to tell you, I hate to break it to you, it is law. It got royal assent and it came into force on the 26th of June. This is scandalous. This is a huge story. Yeah. Tell us more about that because you can explain it better than I can explain it. Go ahead.
Well, what this means is that companies now, if you're a creditor to a company, so you've done some work for them, and now they owe you the money and they're not paying, whether they can, whether they can't afford it or they just don't want to pay you. Traditionally, prior to last Friday, what you'd be able to do is to go to court and say, these people owe me money. If they don't pay me, then I'm going to bankrupt them. I'm going to wind them up and get my money that way. It's a last resort. Well, that now apparently is illegal. What's really bad about it, which is one of the clauses in there, is that say you're the same guy, you're the same supplier, you're now not allowed to take them to court, but you have to continue to supply them. Even though they've not paid you, you have to continue to supply them for a certain period of time, which is determined by the court and not anybody else. So your debt then, you're the company that supplies widgets, and they've not paid you for the widgets, so you've tried to wind them up. Well, you can't do that. But the court then says, no, you have to continue to supply them with widgets for another 30 days. They're actually compelling companies to trade with one another.
That's outrageous. It is. Yeah. It's
enormous. It's absolutely enormous. And there are exemptions, and the exemption is if you're a company with a turnover of less than 10 million, 50 employees or something, well, that's, you don't have to abide by those. But the problem is it's the entire supply chain up the line. So you're forcing a supply chain just to take on more and more debt. And then at some point, it will just become unsustainable. No one will get paid. And who's the person left carrying the can at the bottom?
Muggins.
It's the small guy, the one with a small business, So again, it's another way of screwing small businesses for whatever the reasons are. They've done it with small bars and restaurants and hotels and everybody in the hospitality industry. Now they're trying to do it kind of by the back door with this piece of legislation, which went through without a murmur.
Imagine I don't miss an episode of Ian King on Sky News. I always catch his business programme. He does it twice daily. And I know that King has not been talking about this. And you've described it beautifully. And it only benefits massive businesses. And it screws the little guy. And it's just gone through. It's been given royal assent. I did see something. It might not have been the Sunday Times now. It might have been one of the other broadsheets yesterday. That's just an absolute scandal, isn't it? Imagine.
I didn't believe it when I was sent it. Someone sent it to me and they said, have you seen this? And I'm going, no, it doesn't make any sense. And then you read it and lo and behold, that's exactly what it is. it's utterly extraordinary, and no one's saying anything.
No, and the idea that politicians could come up with this stuff. I mean, I'm tired of telling my listeners that, you know, elected politicians are not in charge. They are not making these decisions. You know, their benefactors, their donors are making these decisions for them. I mean, this thing, I'd want to libel myself, and I certainly don't want you to commit libel, but this is a Richard Desmond thing. I agree with Andrew Marr on BBC One yesterday morning. It stinks to high heaven, regardless of whether or not any, you know, rules have been broken. To have, you know, billionaires sitting with secretaries of state, showing them videos about planning decisions, planning they want to do, asking him to expedite it for him so that he can be saved a lot of money, and then it happens. It's filthy, Simon. What else can you describe it? Only filthy, right? No, don't say anything. Don't answer that.
I can't, because I've got a good mate of mine actually works for him. So
all right, fair enough. Listen, we'll move on from that. I understand that people will be able to watch proceedings on Thursday, and when it progresses, they'll be able to watch it. Is that right?
Well, we've just got notification through from the court, actually, so they're making that slightly difficult. So what you have to do is to email the court and ask for permission to be able to be stuck on the Skype conference or however it's going to be. And then the judge will decide whether he accepts that those people are allowed on it. I don't think it's a good idea for me to publish the email address, because if I do, then all that's going to happen, everybody's going to get blocked. Yeah. So we're going to do, we believe it's legal for us to record it, because if it was in court, it would be an open court. So we'll record it, and then we'll probably put a highlights reel up or do something like that subsequent to it. But obviously we'll be updating through the day as and when we hear anything. It's
going to be I mean it's huge, this, because I certainly don't think you were being, I don't think you were exaggerating, and I don't think you were grandstanding at all. I don't think you're like that at all, actually. But when you said it's the biggest thing in our lifetime, it is. It is. The implications of it are absolutely huge. And I want to ram home again the financial implications. Ken Clark was on LBC Radio today, and he said he wouldn't advise Johnson to introduce austerity measures soon, but they will have to come in further down the line. Public spending will be cut. Even if we all go back to what we knew as normal tomorrow, Simon, and just try to pick up from pre-March, the economic hit. Can you give our listeners, before we run out of time, some indication of just how bad it's going to be without fear-mongering? Because I know you don't do that. I follow you. I certainly don't do it. But the implications, even if we started everything again now, the cost of it, Simon. Talk about that over the next few years.
Well, it's quite interesting what they're saying. The government is saying that, so they're saying that they're not going to introduce austerity measures and they're not going to raise taxes. Well, a 5-year-old will be able to see that you have to do one or the other if you're going to repay this money at some stage. What they're going to do to repay the 400 billion or 450 billion, honestly, I don't know, because without cutting spending or raising taxes, what else are you going to do? There is no other way of raising money. And, actually what they should do is to lower taxes and lower regulations to make it easier for businesses to work and more attractive for businesses to work, so that business people can trade their way out of it and they can start creating jobs, which is what business people do, start creating goods and services that people want to buy so they can spend their money on it. And that will be how you'll regalvanize the economy. I fear that what the government are actually going to do is to go on some massive spending spree on public infrastructure. A bit like Roosevelt did in the 30s after the Great Depression, which everybody thought was a great idea, but it was absolutely terrible. It just prolonged it. So I think you'll see HS2. I mean, I know that's been given the go-ahead, but that will just carry on with the go-ahead because that's a public infrastructure project. That's a good thing. And maybe they'll put loads more money in, who knows, building airports, railways, whatever this stuff. But these are government-created jobs. They're not real jobs. So that's kind of what scares me. We're headed towards a real socialist economy. There's going to be a few businesses, I think, that are going to be nationalized. It's going to be a tough few years. But if we have to put a kind of a positive spin on it, I think from a large economic, from a country's economic perspective, I think it's really bad. For each individual person, which is what we really have to think about, there's probably, most people are still going to have a job. Most people can still afford to pay their bills. Most people can sit, at night and watch the telly and eat their food. No one's going to starve. So actually, I don't think life is going to change massively for every single person. Obviously a few will get hit really hard. So, we have to try and remain positive. As much as politicians try and mess everything up for us. If we just get on with our own lives and the government just get out of the way, we'd be a whole lot better off, I think.
Listen, I'm not going to get into a big socialism argument with you, but the lunatics, McDonnell and Corbyn and their pals, they're not socialists. They never were and they never will be. These are social democrats. It's totally different. A guy like you, Simon, somebody with a brain and an entrepreneurial spirit, that you've done very well for yourself, and I congratulate people like you who've worked and made your own money. Under real socialist governments, you'd have done okay. Socialists, like real socialists, historically, in Latin America, they never came for guys like you. They didn't do that, no matter what the Western media says. But we might have a row sometime in the future when all of this is over about socialism. But that's just my opinion. I can't wish you well enough, to be honest, this week. I really can't. This is a tyranny that's been visited on everybody. I'm glad that you're doing something about it. Thanks to you for doing it, and thanks to the legions of people who crowdfunded. Do you still need help financially?
No, is the short answer to it. But what I've found is that people, when they put their £5 or £10 or £20 or however much it might be in it, they feel as though they're part of something, and it's almost giving people a voice, I guess. And that's been really quite valuable.
Mate, good luck with it. We'll be following it closely. And when it's all said and done, please do come back on the programme and talk to us about the experience of it. Hopefully, you get the decision that the country needs. The right, the only just decision is for this to be declared to be illegal, for people to be prosecuted for it, and for the country to get back to normal and people get back to living their lives the way they used to. Simon Dolan, all the best this week, and thanks so much for giving us your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, mate. Always fun. Speak to you next week, maybe.
Please God. Thanks, Simon. All the very best. Simon Dolan there, who takes the UK government to the High Court this coming Thursday. The preliminary hearing on Thursday. Very important is that. Now, I know a lot of people, you don't share Simon's optimism there. There's a lot of us who believe that the collapsing of the economy is deliberate. I'm one of them. I don't spend my time on this programme ramming my opinion down people's throats. I respect other people's opinions. But this guy's heart's in the right place. He knows what he's doing, and we'll watch it closely from Thursday onwards. Simon Dolan on the Richie Allen Radio Show. Now, Kevin Barrett will be with me. He'll be live from Wisconsin. Lots to talk about. Kevin has not been on for 6 months. So we'll ask him about lockdown in the United States. We'll talk about Black Lives Matter. But I really want to talk to him about the Black Lives Matter row brewing with Zionists in the UK. People like the Campaign Against Antisemitism, a charity, I know, who they had a bit of a Twitter spat over the weekend when the Black Lives Matter official Twitter account started criticising the fact that UK politicians are gagged from speaking out against Israel. And the Black Lives Matter official account in the UK tweeted its solidarity with the beleaguered Palestinians. So I definitely want to get into that with Kevin Barrett in a few minutes' time. Please tweet the programme. It's at Richie Allen Show. I'll be reading your tweets in about 60 seconds' time. We'll get headlines as well from FSN. We might have another tune. It's a Monday, after all. Let's ease our way back into the week. Let's do that. Right, back in a couple of minutes.
Thanks to you, The Richie Allen Show is the most listened to independent radio show in Europe. Show your support for this unique broadcaster by making a regular financial contribution. Just the price of a cup of coffee each month will make a massive difference. Visit richieallen.co.uk for details.
Renowned healer Mark Bayersky travels the world to find the most unique and powerful crystals for self-healing. Since the ancient times, crystals have been used as healing tools. They hold a natural healing vibration and are highly charged in positive energy. Mark teaches how to channel the universal energy and transfer it to the crystal to activate its healing power. Each crystal is used for its unique ability to target a different physical or emotional challenge. Mark Bayersky is an author, healer, speaker, and founder of the Pure Energy Healing Academy. He shares powerful messages of inspiration and healing on his daily YouTube videos, reaching millions worldwide. Mark's crystals, healing oils, and incense sticks are most sought after by other healers. His collection is available online at www.markbayersky.com. His work is presented through Lemon House, a company that creates and curates consciously made gifts.
This is The Richie Allen Show, the most listened to independent news radio show in Europe.
And you're very welcome back to it. Simon Dolan there on the radio. If you missed any of that, don't forget, I've just had an email from somebody. Oh, I missed Simon Dolan. You didn't miss him. Well, you did miss him. The programme repeats from 7 o'clock UK time until tomorrow. And it'll be available on iTunes, Spotify, Podomatic, the usual, on demand. On demand. Thanks for your tweets, by the way. A lot of complimentary tweets for Simon Dolan there. Simon is on Twitter. I've tweeted his Twitter handle, if that makes any sense. It's Simon Dolan on Twitter. Find him on there. Hi to Paul Powernight. Hi to Ewan Cooper. Where can we watch it at a later date, says Ewan. Well, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll ask Simon Dolan that, because he said they'll be recording it. I'm sure it'll be on a website or on YouTube. We'll do that. Susan says, Richie, it's also to hide the pension kill grab from layoffs. Hide the profit losses. Get government business handouts. Another way of scamming the public's money. Pushing us further into debt as human fodder whose lives are so precious to them they have stolen our time. That's Susan on Twitter. Thanks for the tweet there, Susan. Appreciate that. Hi to Sniff. Hi to John Stott. Hi to Charlie. How you doing, Charlie? At Richie Allen Show on Twitter. A lot of tweets there coming in from people very supportive of Simon Dolan and what he is doing. Gail tweets, sadly, Richie, I think more elderly are giving up and dying alone because they don't think there's anything to live for, says Gail. I hope that's not right, Gail, but I suspect it might be. Tiger says, wherever I turn, I keep hearing new speak, driven by double think. New normal, new normal, new normal, new normal. Luckily, the GPs have been given instructions on how to treat it. One of the phrases you hear a lot, and I might have mentioned this on Sunday View yesterday, I might have. I can be a bit repetitive every now and then, you know. I think I did mention it. One of the phrases is frontline. Now, as I was lounging on Friday afternoon at home, and things were developing in Glasgow, there were police officers of yesteryear, retired superintendents, and they were coming on to talk about the brave policemen and women. And they're on the front line every day, front line. And I've begun to think this terminology is being used not just by former police officers and present police officers and politicians, because they use it all the time, front line. It's because they've created an idea, I think, or a reality, whereby the public are the enemy. That's very, very basic stuff. I don't mean it's basic stuff. I've put that in a very crass, very simplistic way, but I think you understand it. Front line. I said it yesterday. Surely the men and women of our police forces are not on any front line. Surely they are in our communities. I'm not the enemy. You're not the enemy. So newspeak is very important. Language and the changing of language and the introduction of terminology. When you start to hear phrases regularly used, it is undoubtedly to change the mindset of the watching or listening public. No doubt in my mind. And that's a terrible, terrible phrase. Front line. There isn't a war in this country. The police aren't at war with the public. They police by consent, allegedly. They're there at the consent. They serve at the pleasure of the people of the country, of the taxpayers of the country. They're there to be of service when necessary. But they use terms like, words like front line. Who's the enemy? Well, there's only one conclusion you can draw, and that is the enemy is the great British public, or the public in the United States or elsewhere. Let's have headlines. Let's have headlines from FSN. Kevin Barrett standing by. Will be with me in a couple of minutes' time. You don't want to miss that. Here we go.
From Feature Story News in Washington, I'm Simon Marks. In a victory for US abortion rights activists, the Supreme Court has struck down a Louisiana law that would have heavily restricted abortion in the state. All 4 gunmen who attacked the Pakistani stock exchange in Karachi earlier today have been killed, and Iran has issued an arrest warrant for President Trump, accusing him of the murder of General Qasem Soleimani.
Yes, I mean, the United States did murder Qasem Soleimani extrajudiciously. It was an outrage and it was a crime, but the US isn't a member of the International Criminal Court. It's unlikely that anybody will ever arrest Donald Trump. I will ask Kevin Barrett about that, of course. He's been to Iran many times. This is your Richie Allen radio show. There is none like it. Live from Salford in Greater Manchester. We're into the second hour now. Before we get Kevin Barrett, let's have Banana Manarama. Bananarama. Yeah, you might think that's a pretty apt or appropriate name for a song these days. Bananarama, cruel summer on the Richie Allen radio show. Looking out the studio window, it's raining cats and dogs in Salford. It looks great, Salford, in the rain. Well, it's mostly rain in Salford. My guest this hour needs very little introduction. It's been ages since he was on, so thank God he's on today. He's a noted academic, writer, broadcaster, and all-round good guy. You can find him at his website, truthjihad.com. I first met him, I always say this, many, many moons ago, when he was facing down a very hostile right-wing media in the United States who wanted to, well, destroy him for having the temerity to encourage his students to think for themselves, well, about everything. Delighted to welcome back to the programme the one and only Dr. Kevin Barrett. Kevin, welcome back. How are you?
Hey, I'm well, Richie. I'm sitting here looking at the rain here too. So I guess it's raining everywhere pretty much.
And you know what? It's the proper weather for the mood that most people I encounter. Glum, gloomy, the lockdown. We'll talk about that in a second. Maybe I was a bit glib a second ago. You probably didn't hear me. But I was referring to the Iranian, government imploring Interpol to help them arrest the US President Donald Trump for his part in the assassination, the murder, and the extrajudicial killing, the completely illegal, wanton illegal act of killing the Iranian general, how do I pronounce it, Kevin? Solomon Qassemi.
Qasem Soleimani.
Qasem, yeah, there you see, Qasem Soleimani. Look, it's probably a little bit of saber rattling. The US isn't signed up to the International Criminal Court. What do you think the Iranians are trying to achieve by saying this?
Well, one of the nice things about the government in Iran is that there is a substantial faction of people in that government who actually care about truth and justice. And I'm not sure I could say that about really practically any other government on earth. Maybe a little bit of Venezuela and Cuba from their own particular perspective. And I suppose there might be a few more outliers and stragglers here and there. But in Iran, there's a solid faction of people who really are committed to truth and justice based on their religious and metaphysical principles. And so they actually do what is right, even if it doesn't work out so well for them personally. There's a limit to how far you can go with that philosophy and still keep your government running. But they go about as far as anybody. And it's actually kind of a miracle that the Islamic Republic has survived this long with people like that in certain parts of it. So I salute them for this. And, if I could help anybody rendition Trump and get him to The Hague or Tehran, either one, I would be very proud and honored to do that. So if anybody in our military or special forces who's expert in renditioning people is setting up a perfectly legal rendition of Trump, I would be honored to help in any way I could.
Yeah, it is a terrible thing, regardless of how anybody feels about geopolitical events, regardless of which side they're on. It's murder. Murder is murder. It's as simple as that. But of course, it's all too common these days, the use of drone strikes to take out people that you don't like. no judge and jury, no court case, just kill your alleged enemies. I want to ask you, you may have seen this, you may not have seen it. Channel 4 ran, I'm sure it was Channel 4, ran a documentary very recently, and I watched it. It was a documentary about the Queen's role in the plot to overthrow Mohammad Mossadegh and basically bring down his government back in 1953. I foolishly got very excited about it. Even me, believe it or not, I can be naive, Kevin. And I watched it, and there was some good points. There were some good parts of the documentary, but they largely gave the Queen a pass. But it was interesting. Have you seen that? Are you aware of that documentary?
I heard about it. I haven't seen it, though.
Yeah, I don't know if you'll be able to see it from where you are. I can probably find a way of getting it to you. What it brought home to me and my better half watching it is just how important that whole period of history is. And I doubt very much that high school, we say high school, but it's secondary school pupils in the UK, they're not learning that Iran had a democratically elected government, a man that had nationalised Iran's oil that it owned and was using it to do great things in the country. It was a very upwardly mobile country. A lot of everybody was doing well. Women, equality. I mean, you can't say enough about it. And I think probably more than ever, it's important that people know about that. Would you agree?
Yes, that's true. Although I think it's important to point out that the current Islamic Republic has done even more for women's rights than Mossadegh did. And that, when they took over under the Shah, that women were largely excluded from the educational system. And under the Islamic Republic, among the many human rights indicators where they've made huge improvements, is that the education of women has become totally universal. Actually, women are more educated than men now. They make up a majority of college students, a majority in most fields in terms of teaching. Women are fully participants in the Iranian workforce, the technological sector, the educational sector. And this is something that people often miss because they have these prejudices, thinking that if you had an Islamic Republic, they must, of course, be very anti-women. But that's just not true. And it's another example of how people are, their prejudices about Islam are so often wrong.
What if I throw into the mix claims, and I know some of these are true, that gender discrimination is a serious problem in Iran in terms of access to work, equal pay, rights, legal access for women in terms of getting their own passports, getting married. A lot to be done in Iran now, Kevin. Let's be honest about it. It's not any utopia for women, right?
Well, I don't know. Actually, I honestly haven't heard about any of the things that you're mentioning here. I've met lots and lots of women in Iran who have, ranging from university professors to the people in media, the people who were making a film when I was there, that I was interviewed for the film, were all women. At least half of all of the important people in the kinds of organizations that I'm dealing with when I'm over there are women, and they all are ready to defend the Islamic Republic with their lives. And they feel that it has liberated women, and they feel sorry for Western women who they feel are mistreated. And I think that probably the statistics in terms of where women are employed and how high up in the power pyramid they are probably better in Iran than in the West. But still, there's probably in certain fields maybe a preponderance of men. Maybe there's an earnings gap. I don't really know. I haven't looked at the earnings. I know in the West, here in the U.S., women earn, what is it, 2/3 or something on the average of what men earn. However, if you look carefully at the reasons for that, the reasons turn out to be essentially that men have a vastly higher testosterone level, are much more aggressive, much more interested in climbing up the power hierarchy. Basically, men are jerks. And so because men are aggressive jerks, they are always going to devote themselves with more energy and ferocity and tenacity to getting a higher level position. Whereas women, having less of that testosterone that makes men crazy, are much more well-rounded. They balance family, emotional life, leisure, and so on, and they're less driven. And that's the reason why there's that pay gap. And I assume that probably something like that is also true in Iran, because Iranian women, like women in the West, have a tiny fraction of the testosterone of men. That's just the way we're born, Richie.
Yeah. I don't want to stay on this because, look, I'm a supporter of Iran's right to self-determination. And I'm a supporter of Iran's right to defend itself. And I know that Iran hasn't attacked another country in centuries. And that Iran has legitimate grievances against the United Kingdom, against the United States, France, Israel. Absolutely, right. But I don't like some of the stuff that goes on in Iran. And maybe change is coming. But some of the women you talked about meeting, I mean, some of these women, they work for the religious police there. And they've been seen on, television footage and videos that have been smuggled out, beating women for not having their hair tied up or in the hijab. These aren't good things, Kevin. It's not a good society to be living in if you have to endure that sort of nonsense, in my opinion.
Well, I kind of agree with Ahmadinejad, who opposed the mandatory hijab. So I'm kind of with you on that one, although the women I've met there are not part of the religious police. On the contrary, the women I've met are in think tanks, and they're artists and filmmakers and journalists and writers, public intellectuals, government ministers, public servants, representatives in the parliament, and things like that. And I think Iran has a much higher percentage of women in such positions of power than the United States does. But I agree that the mandatory hijab is dubious. I would support mandatory Islamic dress for both genders. Traditional Islamic dress, I would support a ban
mandatory
on pants and shirts and ties. Yeah,
I can't believe I'm listening to Kevin Barrett. I know. Look, first of all, for our listeners who don't know, Kevin converted to Islam, which I have respect for. But come on, mandatory. Nobody based on any religious belief should be mandating anything for anybody. If you want to believe in God and you want to pray to God, I will afford you the utmost respect. And if somebody wants to discriminate against you because of your religious belief, I'll stand alongside you shoulder to shoulder. But I don't believe in God, and no man or woman is going to tell me that I have to wear something based on their belief in a fairy godfather in the sky. I'm surprised at you, my great friend, and you're still my great friend, but I'm not happy listening to this.
Well, I'll tell you why, Richie. It's just an absolute travesty that the traditional, not just Muslim countries, but countries all over the world have adopted Western dress and thrown their own traditions on a bonfire and burned them and become, they're aping the West like monkeys. It's pathetic. I support all traditional countries mandating their traditional dress and throwing out Western dress. So it's not just a religious thing. And when I say Islamic dress, I don't mean dress that only Muslims wear. What I mean is dress that has these kinds of characteristics of being loose, covering, and basically the traditional dress. And the reason I'm in favor of mandating it isn't because there's any Islamic requirement religiously. There isn't. There's no such requirement, obviously, which is why these countries have aped Western dress. So it's not a religious commandment. What I am basing my position on is an anti-imperialist, anti-colonialist imperative, and it's a state of emergency in the non-Western world. They've been culturally genocided. They need to get their cultures back, and until the state of emergency is over, they need some mandatory measures like this.
Now, we've loads to cover. I want to get your own thoughts on lockdown. We're going to talk Black Lives Matter and Israel. One more question on Islam. And sorry for doing this now. You know how much I love you. I love Kevin Barrett, by the way. There's no secret there. It's a real man crush I have on Kev. I shouldn't be saying that to a Muslim. The worst person in the world.
People get the wrong idea about these things these days.
Of course. Listen, whenever it comes up, whenever religion comes up, I hear from people who say, and these are not right-wing people now. Sometimes they're left-wing people whom they are defenders of Islamic countries. And they say to me, through gritted teeth, they say, Richie, it really pisses me off to admit this, but the right-wing idiots, the Tommy Robinsons and these guys, when they say that striking or chastising physically your wife or your woman is permitted, and imams permitted, and it is accepted, that's true that. And no matter how many Islamic scholars say on television or radio it's not true, it is true. And that it's a big problem and it still goes on. And I want to move away from this because I didn't bring you on to talk about this. How would you respond to that?
You can't say something like that without giving me a chance.
Oh, no, you have. Jesus, of course. Excuse me. Of course. No, I'm saying after you answer that, I don't want to be boring you with it. We'll move on to something else. So go ahead.
Right. So, yeah, there's a Quranic passage that is traditionally interpreted as saying that a man has a right to strike lightly as a last resort after a long list of other measures, including, leaving the bed and moving to sleeping in another room and so on and so forth. And that's in the context of a society where people were self-policing. There was no police. There were no jails. So it's a completely self-policing society. Well, today, look at the amount of force that has to be used to keep public order. If people look at their spouses crossways and somebody calls 911 and people end up being dragged off to jail, and our prisons in the United States are just packed with people. It's the percentage of the young black people in particular in our prisons is extremely high. The conditions in those prisons is beyond torture. It's far more cruel to keep people in those prisons a few days than it would be to simply give them 99 lashes and let them go. And if you want to prove that, just give them that choice and you'll get almost everybody will leave the prison if at the price of 99 lashes. So even 3 or 4 days in an American prison is far more cruel than the cruelest Islamic punishment that exists. And so in a self-policing society, a minimum of force has to be used in all societies to keep public order. And in a self-policing society, this was part of how public order was kept. And many times it would lead to injustices. Overall, were there more injustices in that self-policing society with no cops and no prisons than we have in today's society? I don't know.
Who knows? Yeah, fair enough. Kevin Barrett is our guest, truthjihad.com. Great to have him on from Wisconsin. The lockdown, Kevin. I'll just ask you for your thoughts. There we were, moseying. I love that word, mosey. We were moseying along, going about our lives in February. Before we know it, the economy is basically stopped, like the stopping of an escalator. Everything stops. People are told to stay at home. Huge problems with that financially, emotional well-being, mental well-being. It's been going on for months now. How have you been finding it, and what are your thoughts on what's been happening and why?
Well, like I say to everybody I run into, the world isn't getting any less crazy. I should have seen this coming. Would have been obvious if we sat down and thought about it even 5 years ago, that there was going to be some kind of biological attack to prevent China from rising to number one world power status. This is geopolitics 101. So we should have seen it coming, but the precise details wouldn't have been quite so obvious. We might have thought, well, it'll be some kind of ethnic specific thing. It turns out it probably wasn't, and that all of this collateral damage to the United States is probably intentional. This collateral damage all over the world is probably intentional, and this is a huge global reset, and the lockdown is part of the biggest heist in world history. It's a gigantic transfer of wealth from ordinary people to the world's richest people, the banks and corporations that basically own everything in the West. And I think that this lockdown is also conditioning us to accept a ratcheted up Orwellian dystopia, and all of this is in the interests of the power elite. So it's horrible. But what are you going to do about it is the question. I guess trying to educate people and hoping for the best is really, and praying for the best is all we can do. But I'm quite upset and unhappy, and I sympathize with all the people who are dissidents against things like wearing masks and being locked down. But I don't buy into the theories that there's no virus or that it's not dangerous. I think it is dangerous, and I think that it was created to be dangerous, probably at the University of North Carolina and at other American germ warfare facilities.
Where's the evidence to support the ideas that it was developed in the US?
Well, if people were to Google actually DuckDuckGo is better because Google is now worthless.
Massive
so use a good search engine
yeah.
and look for Veterans Today and University of North Carolina and COVID or coronavirus. And it's not just at Veterans Today, but I know we've covered it there. And you'll find that, in fact, it's been patented. The University of North Carolina appears to have patented the novel coronavirus. They were doing research on this, enhancement of bat coronaviruses that could be run through human cells to make them infectious to humans. That's probably how this thing was created. And it looks like they have a patent for it there. And that would evolve. Then they of course, set up a false trail so they could blame the Chinese. They attacked China in Wuhan, where there's that level 4 lab. And now they're in a position where they can blame China at any level they want. If they just want to keep the current level of hostility with China going, they just keep saying it was people eating bat soup slurpers that did it. And then if they want to ratchet up the war on China a little bit, they can say, no, it was actually made in that lab and it escaped by chance. And then if they want to really ratchet up the war on China, they can say the Chinese did it intentionally. Look at what's happening to our Western economies. It's all China's fault. And then they can do a shooting war.
Why would the people working in North Carolina be stupid enough to patent something that they were going to deliberately unleash on civilization? Why would they leave a trail so easy to find? I'm not in any way being condescending or disingenuous or in any way trying to be smart-arsed, as we say in Ireland, but so easy that veterans today could find it. I'm a bit sceptical there, Kevin. I'd prefer to have a whistleblower from one of these labs to say, look, yeah, we did manufacture this virus. But I don't know why anybody would be so stupid as to patent something and then unleash it on society in that way. Too easy to discover, no?
Well, that's a good point. I don't think the people who were behind the attack actually were the same people who manufactured this virus. And we don't even know for sure that this patent is, in fact, this particular novel coronavirus. That's not 100% certain. But what is certain is that there was this gain-of-function research going on bat coronaviruses at that university, probably elsewhere as well. So yeah, you're right. That is not maybe quite as big a smoking gun as some people say it is. But the fact that this kind of incredibly dangerous research has been going on, and the fact that the U.S. germ warfare complex has gotten so out of control in the past 20 years, very strongly suggests that that's what's going on here. And also, you could have predicted something like this. Again, 5 years ago, John Mearsheimer wrote that piece on Can China Rise Peacefully? And his answer was no, that China is going to be heading into a war with the U.S. The U.S., like all great powers that face a rapidly rising challenger, the U.S. is going to wage a preemptive war to stop that rise of China. And what it needs to do is stop China's rapid economic growth. And to do that, it is going to be worth sacrificing American prosperity and global prosperity as well. Because, as Mearsheimer writes, security is more important than prosperity. So anybody who read that and many other similar things 5 years ago would have known that something like this was coming. They're going to blow up the global economy to stop China's rise. And the big problem is that China has public banking, which is why that it has such a robust economy. If you don't have usury by private bankers like we have in the West, your economy doesn't have that 33% usury tax that cripples all of our economies. That's why China grows so fast. The bankers who are collecting the 33% usury tax on every good and service produced in the West are not willing to allow the Chinese public banking model to succeed worldwide. It threatens their power not only geopolitically, but also as a model of banking. And so that's why they have done this as a global reset.
And they couldn't do to China what they did to Venezuela and what they did to other countries like Iran because of the scale of the Chinese influence in terms of its sales to our countries. This is important, and I think you're right. Some of our female listeners are annoyed saying that Kevin was justifying the hitting of a woman. He wasn't. You need to listen back to it. He was explaining in context historically what was going on before law and order, before police and before officialdom. He's certainly not and didn't justify violence against women. I want to make that clear.
Well, no, let me add just to make it clear that Quranic verse is typically interpreted as justifying hitting with a siwak. A siwak is a toothpick. So this is a purely symbolic act. It is not an act of actual physical violence. And Islamic scholars have always followed Prophet Muhammad in strongly condemning actual violence against women. And so it doesn't go very well with today's sensibilities. Nothing from 1,500 years ago does, or 1,400. But it's, if we stop and think about the world that we're in today, all of that violence is still there. It's just concealed. And we imagine that we're in some kind of bourgeois paradise because we don't see the violence. But if you actually saw what's going on in prisons.
Yes, Kevin. Ironically, we've learned through. I know we don't trust the media generally, of course, but there are some journalists still doing some good work, and incidents of domestic violence are off the scale because of the lockdown, because of the condition that the lockdown has placed people in, the conditions, I should say, and the problems arising out of that, and anger and fear and depression. I want to ask you this. Kevin Barrett is our guest, truthjihad.com. Tell me this, Kevin. When we hear terms like global reset, which we are hearing a lot lately, it's a term that we're hearing a lot lately from researchers and journalists such as yourself. Give us the Cliff Note version of it. What is it? What is the aim of the global reset?
Well, I think the reset is about changing the trajectory of history in the same way that 9/11, a false flag targeting Islamic civilization, changed the trajectory of history and gave the West a new enemy to justify the military spending and the wiping out of civil liberties. We're seeing this new ramped up hostility to Chinese civilization and to an extent Russian civilization as part of this. It's basically so part of it is telling us who the new enemy is, and that's China. But it's a lot bigger than that. I think that part of the banksters' quest to maintain and extend and centralize and consolidate and intensify their power involves recognizing that the whole currency system and economic system as it exists today is unsustainable. It's going to be replaced with something. What's going to replace it? And again, they don't want public banking to replace it. They want to stay in control. How are they going to do that? Well, they need to first solidify their economic power. So like all previous big wars and economic catastrophes, this was engineered in order to take over a bigger market share. The big players always use wars and depressions to buy up distressed assets from smaller competitors at pennies on the dollar. And that is happening in spades more than ever before in history right now, as we see the small businesses being destroyed everywhere and the big businesses taking their market share. Here in the United States, Walmart and Amazon are doing really well, and all the corner shops, mom and pop stores, restaurants, everything that's independently owned is being put out of business. So this reset partly involves the biggest players just gobbling up everything. It involves the liquidation of trillions of dollars in debt, even possibly quadrillions eventually if we take derivatives into consideration. I talked to Daniel Estulin about this on my radio show a while back. So he called the whole coronavirus thing a gigantic debt liquidation scam because there's unsustainable debt. It can't be paid off. Compound interest has this mathematical, exponential quality. So once it has a certain point, it'll never be paid off. So then how do the people to whom the money is owed keep their top position in the world and even intensify their top position? Well, they need to have an excuse to sort of liquidate a lot of debt and then have the government just allow them to print even more money, which then they use to buy up all the distressed assets. So I think that's the gist of it. And then they need to retire what they call legacy systems. For them, cash is a legacy system. It's not very efficient if you're a big bankster that owns a government that wants to control and steal from everybody's economic activity, because people use cash, they can avoid taxes and so on. So you want to get rid of cash, and you make it dirty. There are all these other legacy systems as well that coronavirus is getting rid of, including civil liberties. If the West is going to beat China, this artificial intelligence commission that the Pentagon drafted here in the U.S. told us that we're going to have to become an even bigger Orwellian dystopia than China. We're going to have surveillance everywhere, and all of that surveillance footage is going to have to go straight to the AI systems so that we can win the race to AI instead of China. Because as Putin said, the country that first gets to AI will rule the world. So it's a reset at all of these levels, economic and technological, as well as military and strategic, in the sense of setting up the next big conflict as the axis of the bankers of the West trying to win another century or longer than that of ruling the world. by essentially changing all of these trends that were running against them.
It's brilliantly put that. I can't argue with that. I like to argue with you because you're bright and because you can take it. But I can't argue with any of that. Kevin Barrett is our guest. I want to just briefly talk about Bill Gates. Truthjihad.com, by the way, for Kevin. Before we talk about Israel and Black Lives Matter, we will do that this hour before we run out of time, because that's a very big story. You've got this guy, Bill Gates, and we often talk about the unseemly and nefarious influence of billionaires like Soros and Open Society foundations. Bad actor, no doubt, but a frontman, a puppet, I believe. And Gates now has really come into his own in the last few years. I talked a little bit about him yesterday on the programme, as best as I could, about how he's managed to gain such influence. And I've come up with this kind of idea in my head, Kevin, that Gates has managed to make himself the de facto CEO of health policy for planet Earth, but not only health policy, but farming policy as well. And he's done that, of course, through donating billions of dollars to thousands of universities, colleges, big pharma companies, NGOs. He gives more money to the World Health Organization than anybody else. And Gates was brilliant, and I know you've spoken about this before. Gates was very sharp in seeing how he could use charitable foundations to take control of shaping public policy. Gates is massive now. Massive beyond anything anybody ever imagined. And he's behind the plan to mandate vaccines for every man, woman and child on planet Earth. He said as recently as Thursday last that there will be no going back to going to concerts and going to play T-ball, Kev, with your son, or going to the swimming pool. None of that until we accept we have to take the vaccine. And of course he's behind, well, he's not behind it, but he's the biggest pusher of digital health passports and, digital marks, basically, tattoos and stuff, so that we can be read by machines when we go places. Is this guy evil incarnate, Kevin? I don't want to be using silly tabloid terms, even though it is a silly tabloid term. Is he evil incarnate, or is he just another useful idiot for something even darker?
Well, that's a good rhetorical question, Richie. Yeah, I think in a sense both, A and B is the answer, but I don't think he thinks he's evil. I think he looks at the data as he sees it and thinks, well, this is the best thing to do. I don't think he's cackling and saying, we're going to turn the planet into a slave plantation and mistreat everybody, and we're going to be living high on the hog and flying around on the Epstein Express airlines, and everybody else is going to be chipped and toiling in the fields, or locked in their domiciles, having to give immunity passports to go out on the street, and cackling gleefully with sadistic joy. I don't think that's his attitude. I mean, I think he thinks he's an actual philanthropist and benefactor. And to get a sense of how the world looks to somebody like him, we back up a moment and we say, okay, we have 7+ billion going on 8 billion people on this planet. We humans have gobbled up much of the planet's larger composite ecosystem and turned it to our advantage. And looks kind of marginally sustainable at this point. There are all sorts of reasons that it's going to be very, very hard for humans to kind of just keep doing what they're doing, which is, breeding like rabbits and living happy, natural lives. So what are we going to do here? Well, people like me who are really smart and have access to all the data, we look at all that data and we say, we can have a better world if people like me have a lot of power over everybody, and we can make these decisions for the common good, of course, and everybody has to follow what we say. So I think that's his kind of philosophy. And to get a sense of how this works, if you look at the sort of futurists, the people who write about these kinds of issues, what you find is a lot of them think that, for instance, a hyper-surveilled society is necessary and good. For all sorts of reasons. Not only will there be no more crime as soon as you're being watched every move you make, but we'll also avoid these horrible catastrophes such as inventions that could not only kill us, but kill all life on Earth, wipe out life on Earth. Because, humans have gotten so clever and our technological infrastructure is so extensive that, some guy tinkering in his basement might be able to blow up the world, right? What if nuclear fission had turned out to be as bad as some of the people that set off the first atomic bomb test thought it might be? They thought it might actually blow up the whole Earth. And what if it had? We wouldn't be here talking about it, I guess. But it just so happened that it didn't. But what about the next invention? What about the next, anti-gravity or whatever? So the argument is that if we don't have total surveillance of everybody at all times, at some point, some lone wolf is going to set off just massive damage, maybe not only kill off our species, but our whole planet or our solar system or who knows what. And likewise, for instance, people making self-replicating nanobots that feed off whatever energy they can get. Well, that's a recipe for the gray goo. Artificial intelligence, artificial life, and nanotechnology, when they flow together, are likely to create this gray goo stuff that will just replicate itself, suck every bit of energy it can find in its environment to make more copies of itself. It'll just get everything, and that's the end of life on Earth and the universe, unless there's something more powerful than it that can stop it out there, which who knows. So a lot of folks kind of thinking these big thoughts say, we got to bring on technological slavery. Let's put a leash on everybody. Let's get total surveillance of everybody. Then we can make the decisions that'll, balance the ecosystem, prevent global warming catastrophe, prevent all these other catastrophes, and make people happy and healthy. So that's what Gates thinks he's doing. Why is he wrong? Because he doesn't see the spiritual side of it. He's seeing through the one eye of the one-eyed Dajjal or Antichrist, only the physical, only the space-time matter component. That's a psychopathic way of seeing things. He doesn't realize it, though. And so to get back to a sane way of seeing things, we need to open the other eye, the eye of spiritual depth, and understand that the way things really work isn't this psychopathic manipulation of matter in space-time. There's something much deeper going on, and it's happening at a spiritual level, and people need spiritual insight to understand it. So that's my synopsis of why Gates is wrong.
Yeah, and on Gates and Soros, I'm prepared to accept these guys think they're doing the right thing. I do believe that. Soros is a little bit different in terms of what I would say about Gates is I think Gates was seduced by celebrity. I have no doubt that played some part in it, in Gates' conversion, as it were, into, this philanthropist that he would see himself as, that he was seduced by the fact that he could be on the front, on the stage, traveling the world, TED Talks. I think there's definitely something to that. Kevin Barrett is our guest. As for the AI and where all that goes, again, I think that's inevitable. That's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You're absolutely spot on. And what you said was as eloquent as anybody I've ever heard put it, this agenda and where it goes. And sadly for me, I think there is a cut-off point in terms of generations. I think I'm 45, and I know I'm 45 now. I think the generation behind me, they're very worried about it. My generation is worried about it. You're about 10, 12 years older than me, Kev, I think, or maybe a bit less. Your generation are very concerned about it. But I think once you get to the 18 to 35s, I think they're either indifferent or they are embracing it. They are wedded to it, to the notion of implantation, of all the stuff that Musk is doing, of the cloud. They're into it. While we have time, I can't not ask you, because we've got probably about 10 minutes to go, about this row that blew up over the weekend between this Zionist group in the UK called the Campaign Against Antisemitism, which I've had some dealings with in the last few years. A group of morons masquerading as a charity. I would recommend the UK Charity Commission looks into maybe withdrawing its charity status, because it's just an attack dog organisation. It spends its time accusing people of anti-Semitism that have really just been critical of Israel. Well, Black Lives Matter, the official account in the UK, tweeted yesterday, as Israel moves forward with the annexation of the West Bank and mainstream British politics is gagged of the right to critique Zionism and Israel's settler colonial pursuits, we loudly and clearly stand beside our Palestinian comrades. Free Palestine. That's what they tweeted. And the Zionist lobby in the UK took great exception to that. I know you're aware of the story. What do you think of Black Lives Matter? what's been happening in the US. And what do you think of this argument that's brewing up? Also, you'll probably know that a British actress gave an interview to the Independent newspaper. And in that interview, which was about many things, a very exhaustive interview, she said that the tactics used by US police forces that led to the death of George Floyd were basically learned in seminars in Israel. And a UK politician of prominence, Rebecca Long Bailey, retweeted the article. And she lost her job as the Labour Shadow Education Secretary. What do you make of all of this, Kevin?
Well, it sounds like free speech in the UK is even more curtailed than here in the US. And that's saying something. Yeah, we have Zionist attack dogs here too. And they've come after me so many times I can't count them anymore. But, so what do we make of this Black Lives Matter versus Zionist thing that you mentioned? I think Black Lives Matter is actually basically a decent cause. That is, I had a run-in with police brutality myself when I was young, and it left me permanently slightly crippled. I have this repetitive motion syndrome thing on my wrists from having had them, pull as hard as they could to ratchet the handcuffs so tight they almost severed my hands, and then they left it that way for almost an hour and just drove around while I was basically screaming, and then dragged me back to the station and slugged me. And all of this after I had done absolutely nothing wrong. They just thought I looked at them cross-eyed. So I totally emotionally resonate with these people who are upset about the horrific practices of the minority of really bad cops in the U.S. and the way the majority of not so bad cops has covered it up and helped cover it up. And so that's just an outrage. And I'm sure that the people in the black communities here have it worse than the people like me. So it's really a problem. We have a lot of bad apples in our police force here, and the African American community disproportionately gets the wrong end of it. So the Black Lives Matter cause is largely a very just cause. I think it's been manipulated though, and I think the reason we're seeing it hit the 24/7, 365 kind of headlines level right now is it's being used to divide and conquer. It's being used to get us thinking in terms of race. It's stoking the flames of racial consciousness and racial anger and even racial hatred right at the moment when we might have awakened and noticed that we just had $7 trillion stolen by the banksters on the pretext of COVID. So it's very convenient for them to invoke this as divide and conquer right now. As far as this UK thing, I think the reason for this, I don't think this is some kind of conspiracy or anything. I think the Black Lives Matter people are honestly anti-racist. And what's more racist than the Zionist state of Israel? It's a Jewish supremacist state. That's what it is. And the criteria for belonging to the chosen people or the master race or whatever they want to call it is having the right mother, the right DNA. And the people who have the wrong DNA who are actually born there, the natives of the place where this dystopia has been established, are third, fourth, or fifth class citizens who are treated a lot worse than African Americans here in the U.S. by these psychotic, predatory, sadistic police in Israel who are fed the Jewish victimization narrative from early childhood, taught that everybody hates and wants to kill them, and that turns them into the world's most vicious and sadistic bullies. The whole society of Jewish Israel, with a few good exceptions, is the kind of society where they come out to watch the napalm, the white phosphorus raining down on innocent people. They pull up lawn chairs and they have bonfires and barbecues up on the hills overlooking the mowing the lawn of Gaza, the slaughter of thousands of innocent people at a time. That's a big celebration for them. They also love to dress up as the exploding and burning Twin Towers on Purim, the Jewish vengeance holiday that celebrates Jews committing genocide against Persians on the excuse that the Persians maybe didn't like them and were after them. So it's there's a huge problem here, and we're not allowed to talk about it because there's that problem. And if people woke up and noticed this problem, obviously the perpetrators of this horror of Zionism would not be allowed to continue.
But so let me interject, Kev. Don't some Jewish voices in the UK have a point when they say that linking the death of George Floyd to Israel is not only lazy, but it is sinister, because cops in the US have been battering the bejesus out of people for generations. You've only got to look at the conduct of certain police forces in certain parts of the South during the the civil rights movement and the days of Dr. King. So maybe they have a point. Maybe a broken clock is right twice a day. And maybe when Jews said today on national radio, come on, we're just sick to death of being blamed for everything. And you did have some Jews on radio today that are not supporters of the annexation of the West Bank. They have no time for it. But they said, look, we're tired of the Jews getting blamed for everything. We didn't have anything to do with George Floyd's death. What would you say to that?
Well, I'd say that it's true that there has been this police brutality issue in the United States before Israel started training American cops. But I think it's become much worse than it would have been because Israel and its American supporters teamed up with hardline militarists to do 9/11. And that led to not only the murder of 27 million Muslims around the world in the 9/11 anti-Muslim Holocaust that's been documented by Dr. Gideon Polya, but it also led to the destruction of civil liberties and the militarization of American police. And since they've been militarized and full of all this Israeli-style military equipment, the same stuff Israel uses to crush Palestinians, they've been getting training from the Israelis to look at Americans, especially racially inferior Americans, in the same way the Israelis see the Palestinians as racially inferior. They're training the American cops to think even more that way than they would have otherwise. So yeah, it's not completely 100% a problem made in Israel. The problem existed before, but the problem's been made much, much worse because Israel was the single biggest force behind the murder of 3,000 Americans in the controlled demolition of the towers on 9/11, designed to trick the American military into perpetrating a 27 million Muslim Holocaust and ending our civil liberties.
Before I get hammered, Kev, before I get hammered by my Jewish listeners, let me just put a caveat there. Kevin and I have discussed this before. Look up the dancing Israelis. There's a lot of evidence, circumstantial evidence, but fairly hard circumstantial evidence that suggests that a team of Israelis were involved logistically in what happened on September the 11th. Now there is, I don't care what Zionists think of that, and I'm not going to censor Kevin Barrett. We've talked about this before. I just want to move on from it, but they'll be expecting me to jump down your throat and argue with you. I have argued with you for years about this. Why would the CIA or the NSA farm it out? But listen, rather than dwell on that, you make a good point. A lot of US police forces have been going to Israel to train. And this is a wider issue, I think, about the people in the West being seen increasingly more and more by the police as the enemy. Talked about this earlier, Kevin, before you came on. Terminology is being introduced into our lexicon. Words like front line. We hear this all the time on the news. Our brave police officers, they're out there every day on the front line. What front line, Kevin? I thought they were in the community, looking after people and keeping people safe and helping old ladies cross the road. They're introducing the notion of front line to create this notion that we're the enemy, the public. So there's a lot to be said for what you're saying. But I do sympathise with Jewish people who just get tired of the Jews getting blamed for everything. Look, that being said, my opinion of Israel is well known. I despise it. I equate Zionism, or some of the practices of Zionism, with Nazism. I could talk about Ethiopian Jews, the policy to sterilise Ethiopian Jews. We could talk about 800,000 people being kicked out of Palestine by the Stern gang, all the terror. We could be here. I hate the country. But I don't hate it any more than I hate England or the UK or the United States or France and what it does as well. But it's funny here. One of the things that the Black Lives Matters people were absolutely right about saying is this notion of gagging. Nobody wants to take it on, Kevin. Nobody wants to say anything. And the campaign against anti-Semitism has been more successful than any other group in equating anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, which, as you know better than anybody, is a nonsense. But they have. You can't criticise Israel now. And they've introduced this notion to English people who've not considered it before. This notion that Jews have the right to self-determination. And it is utterly racist to suggest that they don't. And it is utterly racist if you say that you don't believe the diaspora story or any of that. And they're winning, Kevin. They're winning in this country.
Yeah, it's really sad. I think Jeremy Corbyn would probably be the current prime minister if it hadn't been for the state of Israel and its British agents, who, if I were British, I would consider them traitors, guilty of treason.
Yeah.
Essentially taking over the country and excluding Jeremy Corbyn from the leadership of the UK was essentially a Zionist made in Israel coup d'etat.
Come on, Kev, he was useless. Kevin, he was useless. When he was leader of the Labour Party, he was given a platform, the likes of which he never had before, and he knew he wouldn't have again. He did 1 million interviews on the BBC and Sky News with huge audiences when he could have called out these lunatic Zionists for what they are. And you know what he did, Kevin? He bent over and he showed them his backside. Dreadful.
Yeah, I agree.
Shocking,
so
huh?
he gets a share of the blame. But these Zionists, and actually Jewish, let's talk about Jewish people of goodwill. And some of them actually are Zionists. There are people, people have wrong ideologies and they're nice people. Hitler was a vegetarian, right? No, but there are also lots of Jewish people who don't identify with Zionism, who are great people. But I would say these Jewish people who are tired of being blamed for everything really should get on the stick and become activists for causes that would remove the reasons why.
That's unfair. If I said that to you, hang on. If I said that's very unfair. If I said that to you, every time there's a terrorist attack over here, and it's blamed on some lone wolf Muslim guy, and we know there are a lot of problems with a lot of these attacks, but let's just say they're all real. And I said to you, hey, as a Muslim, Kevin, you should be out there speaking out against it. If you don't, Kevin, it means that you condone it. That's bullshit, my friend. We shouldn't say that to Jewish people. Go ahead.
That's a good point as far as it goes. However, I do make a point of speaking out about the worst abuses that I see coming out of these allegedly Islamic worlds, especially Saudi Arabia, which is where they have the Haramain, right? The pilgrimage to Mecca. They think that they're the custodians of the religion. And I'm just as hard on those criminals as I am on the criminals in Tel Aviv. And I think that in a certain sense, it's true that just as, I think one way Muslims should combat Islamophobia is by dealing with issues like the hideous corruption and cruelty of the House of Saud, which is just as completely illegitimate as Israel. These Jews should be saying Israel needs to end. It should be Palestine. Everybody should be equal there. And just as I'm saying Saudi Arabia needs to end, there should be no Saudi there. That Arabian Peninsula shouldn't be ruled by one psychopathic family. And so I think we do have a certain responsibility to get, but we also have to be accurate about what we're saying. And a lot of these people that you're talking about, they might be nice people, but they're just really misinformed. They don't understand how absurd it is
it's not their
to say
fault.
that self-determination means you can go halfway around the world and commit genocide to grab land that you claim that your ancestors were on thousands of years ago. That is psychotic. That is insane.
You won't get an argument from me. We're right out of time, by the way. Truthjihad.com. I hope it won't be 5 months before you're back. Before you go, though, settle an argument. I know you're a man of academia. I know you're an intellectual man, and that professional wrestling is probably way beneath you. But I want an answer, and don't say the Iron Sheik. Who's your favourite wrestler of all time? WWF, WWE. You've got to give me an answer, Kev. You've got to settle an argument here. Don't say the Iron Sheik.
No, I would say it's a tie between Jesse Ventura and the Crusher.
And the Crusher, yes. I would always say Randy, Macho Man Savage me. I always loved the Macho Man. You know what? It's always a pleasure speaking to you, and I don't say that. That's not, a flippant thing. I mean it from the bottom of my heart. Love listening to you, Kevin. Truthjihad.com for more on Kevin Barrett, the broadcaster, the author and journalist and peace activist, it must be said. Look after yourself, Kev. Regards to the family, and I can't wait to speak to you again real soon. Thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Richie. Keep up the great work.
You too, my friend. The brilliant Kevin Barrett, live from Wisconsin on Monday's Richie Allen Radio Show. Love shooting the breeze with Kevin Barrett. Thanks to him. Thanks also to Simon Dolan. Godspeed to Simon this week. I am agnostic, not atheist. Let me clarify. Let me be clear. Agnostic. Thanks to Simon Dolan. Thanks to Kevin Barrett. Vernon Coleman, Dr. Vernon Coleman, among the guests on Tuesday's programme. It's bye from me. I'm going out with a bit of Rod Stewart and his cover version of Van de Man's Have I Told You Lately that I Love You. All right. See you tomorrow. Bye.